There are two types of intimacy with a woman, homicidal and sexual. Homicidal is a lot more intimate. We'll learn more about the origins of this quote and much more in today's episode, which centers around a series of deaths in the St. Louis area, spanning from the late 1950s to the early 80s. Some of these deaths were ruled accidental, some were suspicious, but all of the victims crossed paths with Glenn Engleman, a local dentist known for his willingness to help his community. Is he just bad luck, or was something more calculated at play? Stay tuned to find out. My name is Laura. I'm here with my two best friends, Colby and Marina, and this is Grim.
Wow, that was a long opener.
It
but
was.
I'm very interested in homicidal intimacy.
Yes, I debated putting that quote in, but it's
I'm
a
so
good one.
glad. I'm so glad you did.
Yeah.
It took us both off guard right off the rip.
Yep.
Yeah.
Good. Excellent. That's how I wanted
I'm
to start.
intrigued.
Yes.
Surprised eyes.
Yes. And so what I wrote before we actually kick off the episode and I tell you all about Glenn is that I was thinking how we always do the social media and all that stuff at the end. And I will admit, as a podcast listener, when it comes to that, I just end my podcast and move on. So all you listeners, I'm just going to remind you to check us out on Instagram at Grim Crime Podcast and rate and subscribe us. It means a lot and it makes a difference and it hopefully gets us out to more people. So, and if you really love us, you can add a written review, at least on Apple Podcasts. We suspect there's no written reviews on Spotify, right?
Yeah, and I've seen some people share. Somebody shared an episode today from Spotify to Facebook. I didn't know that was a thing, but we also have some people that have been sharing our link tree, so that's super great too.
Which has our Instagram and our everywhere that we're recorded. So,
Our listeners are just the best. Thank you guys so much for your support.
And for our new listeners, we were talking about, we only said it once, but Grim actually stands for something. It stands for Grave Retellings of Insidious Murders and Mysteries. And we have to make sure we plug that in at least sometimes because we struggled with that name and we were happy with what we landed on.
Yes.
So
It took a while.
Yeah.
it did.
It really did. But you know what? We're grim. We're here. We're staying.
Some of the discussions may have been insidious.
and there are definitely some murders that we're going to talk about today.
Have we been retelling things gravely enough, do you think?
Oh, probably not.
Probably not.
I think we laugh a little bit.
Going graver?
More grave?
Deeper.
Gravier.
Ooh.
Yes, please.
All right. So speaking of murders and mysteries, I have all of that to tell you. And I did think about a few ways to tell this story because it is a real life soap opera. And I was thinking I originally wanted to tell it how Colby told hers with Howell, where you kind of talked through the crime that undid everything. And then you focused on that and then you kind of worked your way backwards through all the other crimes and told us. But I think that this story is so convoluted and crazy that you just have to hear it from the beginning so that you can understand all of the different characters and connections with everything.
Let's start at the very beginning.
It is a very good place to start. So I also, before I jump in, want to just give credit to the book I read, which is Appointment for Murder by Susan Crane Bakos. And she has so much detail. I can only imagine the amount of research that went into it. And I got most of my details from there. So I just want to give a huge shout out. It's a really good read because she does
name
it
for
in,
a book too.
It is. I was like, what do I name this episode? I can't take an Appointment for Murder, but
You
so we'll have to
cannot.
think about it.
It's probably TM'd.
Take
it from your lawyer friend.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Sold. All right. Ready?
We're ready.
Okay. So our case today is centered around, his name is Glennon, but I don't think I can make it the entire way through the episode calling him that. So I will call him Glenn Engleman. There is not, I know we like to start with kind of who the characters are and who the people are, but there's not a lot about Glenn's childhood other than it was kind of unremarkable. He did have two hardworking parents and they managed to provide 4 children with a middle-class life. This is in St. Louis, Missouri. Missouri, I believe I was instructed to say. And so Glen was born on February 6, 1928. So 4 children, while common, I think was probably difficult to provide a middle-class life for that. He had 1 sister, Melody, and 2 brothers, Gene and Vernon. His father was a member of the U.S. Air Force. This is, if you remember the infamous episode 3 with Ed Gein, his father was really like overpowered by his mother. I seem to gravitate towards those cases because that is the case here as well. His mother was head of household. His father was, I think Susan in the book said, passive. He worked for the railroad, drank beer, and chewed tobacco. So that was what he was doing passively.
Some staples. I like it.
Yep.
Okay.
Glen kind of followed in his father's footsteps with the military. He served in the Army Air Corps. He had married a woman named Edna Ruth in 1953. She went by Ruth. They never lived together. So Glen lived with quote unquote madre. That's what he referred to his mom as. Her name was Honora, and she was like reclusive and self-proclaimed psychic powers, including her soul being able to leave her body so she could follow Glen around. And she called this astral projecting, ASTRAL. And that means like connected with the stars.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Yeah.
That's the thing. I was going to ask if she knew that that's what that was called back then.
I have heard that is what can be happening when you're laying in bed and you feel like you're about to fall and you wake up really quickly. I have heard people say that is like your body trying to project like that, and that feeling that you get is like your soul falling back into your body.
So this isn't a thing she made up. This is just a thing she said she could do.
I feel like there's an Are You Afraid of the Dark episode about it
I think
too.
there's
watch that.
there's like literal like CIA papers about how to do this. I saw that on TikTok. It could have been total BS, but like I saw images of documents that looked important. But the comment what Marina was talking about, I thought that was just like your muscles relaxing.
I mean,
in
it's
their mind.
It probably is. I'm saying,
but maybe
I
it's
have
it.
heard people say that is, or I read it, or I heard it on the streets when people are talking about astral projection on the street.
That's
I just
fair.
picked it up.
The truth is out there, guys.
That's far more legit than. Wow, that was not Marina singing.
That was not.
I'm impressed.
Every once in a while, I'll throw one in there too. It's not nearly as impressive as Marina singing, but I'll go for it.
Nobody, no crime. Still the best. Got to finish that song.
You're welcome.
Well, that was way more legit, than I thought. I thought this was a random thing that she made up, but
No.
so she there wasn't much about his father, but I'm assuming he had passed away because they only mention Glen living with his mother. Anyway, so he graduated in dentistry at Washington University in St. Louis in 1954. He was admitted under the GI Bill, and he started his practice, opening an office in downtown St. Louis. It wasn't a great area, and he primarily only took clients who could pay cash versus going through insurance. Which, sounds really good, but it also really helps when you don't pay all your taxes.
Yeah, that's typically, cash only businesses.
So, but there were a lot of people there that didn't have insurance. So, he really liked to give discounts if he thought someone was like a really hardworking person. So he was actually pretty well regarded in his community. But he had a really specific definition of hardworking, and it was most definitely not people of color. He was incredibly racist and had lots of books about like the Holocaust and Nazi Germany, and just not great. So when he thought somebody earned a discount, they liked him, but otherwise he actually had been investigated, I think, for refusing to provide dental work to a Black person. So he's not great.
I hate that.
And that person probably won out because he's also not a good dentist. He would make mistakes, like he would put someone under, put them under anesthesia, and then he'd go do something else, what was like, kicking in, and then he would forget that they were under. And so he'd go then, give them more, and then he would like do something else, and then forget and just be like, I'm just gonna do this anyway and drill and do whatever I need to do. So not great.
I want to be a patient of his.
No,
Jeez.
you don't.
This isn't like cooking dinner where you like put something on the stove and walk away. Like you're at your job and you just put someone under anesthesia and you're like, I'm gonna go wash my car.
Yeah.
What was I doing again?
He literally like went to the hardware store. So, yep. And so you're starting to get a picture of him. He's not a stand-up guy. He was doing insurance scams with his brother. Even when he was young, they had reported their boat stolen, and then it was really in their basement, like that kind of thing. And another time he had noticed an air conditioning unit dripping like on the street. And so he paid a bum $20 to come in. He put Novocaine in, I think he remembered this time, and then like roughed up his forehead, and they were going to like bring him out to get a claim against the person whose building it was. And then the AC was gone because the guy like realized it was dripping. But like that, who thinks of doing that? And
Diabolical, insidious people.
yeah, insidious. Yeah, so not great, but that's kind of who he was. And his belief was that crime was the only way to get ahead in life. He was quoted as saying, "You won't ever have anything if you live your life within the law." So that's
Those are words to live by, right there.
Yep. So it may not shock you that Glenn and Ruth eventually divorce 3 years after they were married, but it actually was amicable. Ruth still went to Glenn for her teeth. So
Why? She couldn't find anybody better out there, I guess.
Apparently not. And that's what, she told the police when they questioned her about Glenn's connection to Ruth's new husband's death. Oh, did you forget we were doing an episode of Grimm and not just about bad dentistry? So Ruth had married a man named James Bullock only a couple years after divorcing Glenn. Glenn also married again, this time to Ida, a librarian. They lived together at Glenn's mother's house, again, because he just wouldn't leave. So they lived there until his mother died. What Ruth didn't mention was that she wasn't just amicable with Glenn after their divorce. He had actually introduced her to James. So James was a 27-year-old working at Union Electric Company. He was studying finance at St. Louis University. And on December 17th, 1958, only 5 months after marrying Ruth, James was on his way to a night class, but he would never get there. He was found shot, lying on the ground behind an art museum, still alive, but he did die in the ambulance. One of the guards at the museum said he saw James running with blood on his face and a guy following him with a gun. He had been shot twice in the head and once in the left shoulder by a .22 caliber. His chest also contained lead from half a dozen shotgun pellets, and his car was found with the engine still running and the driver's door wide open. It appeared that the car had been running for a while, like he had been waiting for someone and he had been shot in the car. Since Ruth mentioned that she had been married to Glenn previously, the police looked into him.
Okay.
But he had an alibi. He says the night of the murder, he went to buy Ida, his second wife, a Christmas present. Then he went to his dentist's office to meet a patient/friend, and went to pick up Ida at the library. And then they had dinner at his mother's house, again, where they lived. So they were checking into this alibi, and they found that the patient that Glenn was meeting wasn't actually there for teeth cleaning. He was there to have his wife get an abortion because Glenn performed illegal abortions. Did I not tell you that this was a soap opera?
I'm sorry, what?
Okay.
Yeah. So that was like his side hustle. I think he charged for it. We didn't really talk about it in the book. But
Please tell me he had a separate set of tools for each procedure.
tools, yes, but chair, no.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Oh, no. Did he have stirrups on the dentist chair?
Unclear. I didn't see any pictures.
Could you have both services performed in a single appointment?
I think you could. Yeah. Yep.
I do appreciate the efficiency.
Yeah, so the police use this as grounds to search his office and house, understandably. And they had a witness that would testify that she had had an abortion done by him because this was something he did regularly for people. And the woman never ended up testifying because she, very soon after that, when she was identified as a witness, ended up marrying a man named Donald Ray Horton, who happened to be Glenn's friend, who he met through Melody, Glenn's sister. And Melody paid for the wedding, and the woman just happened to not testify after that.
Okay.
So Melody, by the way, is married to a really successful guy and has tons of money and apparently uses it for things like this. So combined with the fact that Ruth wouldn't give him anything, she had nothing to say about this, and James's route to the class shouldn't have actually taken him past the art museum, which is kind of an unfortunate point here, because I guess it was a place known, like this alleyway was kind of known for gay men to meet each other, and it was kind of like a place to go and be secretive. So I think, again, this was 58. So I think people were just like, oh, he must have been a homosexual, and that's what it was. That's why he was there, and he was meeting someone and got shot, and they kind of just dropped it at that point. So the case was dropped, and nothing really came out of this other than that Ruth was set to receive $64,000 in life insurance from James's death, and that, just to translate to today's dollars, is about $640,000. So quite a bit.
And they were married for 5 months?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And then she used $20,000 of this money to invest in a drag racing strip that Glen was starting. So he had decided he wants to open a drag strip.
And his ex-wife is an investor using the money from her deceased husband's life insurance policy payout.
She is probably for the teeth cleaning.
And he's quite
as
the
a thank you.
entrepreneur. So you've
Yes.
got dentistry, you've got abortion clinic,
Yes.
you've got drag strip.
Yep.
Okay,
Exactly.
wow.
Not the fun drag strip either. Like,
Oh, I wish. But to your
you too long.
point, that probably would have been done in the back
I'm sorry,
alleyway.
I
Yes,
was
that's
thinking
true.
cars automatically.
well, that's correct.
Yes,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, so it
All
took
right.
a minute for my brain to process.
Okay. All right. So the drag strip became a focus for the family. So Glen's sister, I mentioned, Melody, she helped out there. The brothers, Gene and Vernon, helped, and then some of their close friends who did work for them, including Nick Miranda, who was, I think of him as like Glen's apprentice, not in the literal office, but like he would follow him around, saw him as like a father figure. The families had known each other, I think, their whole lives. So, and Nick was a lot younger than Glen, so he kind of looked up to him and followed him around. And then Jack Carter, who was another lifelong friend of Glen, and Don Horton, who married the girl who was going to be the witness. So it's just a nice camaraderie, helping out at setting up the drag strip.
Little community there he's got.
Yeah. Yep.
I need a diagram of all these people.
So you're joking, but I actually considered doing it because like I'm only on page 2.
Oh boy.
So it's actually 3, but I'll try to relate the names, but ask questions because I'm guessing our listeners are also trying to follow.
Yes.
So another helper was a man named Eric Frey, and Melody, the sister, had met him at a dance studio. I guess he was a dance instructor, and they became friends, and Melody introduced him to Glen. Now, during this time, Ida, so that's Glen's second wife, her 16-year-old niece, Sandy, had come to live with Glen and Ida because she had attempted suicide. She lived in North Carolina, and her parents were trying to figure out a place to send her, and it made sense to just get her out of the state, get her somewhere different.
Yeah, away from your family, your close family, to support you.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. That always helps. Glen gave her a job at his office, but also gave her another job, if you know what I mean. So she was 16, which is really unfortunate. And this was to replace the affair that Glen had been having with a married woman named Barbara. She had been married to a dentist friend of Glen's, and then had become pregnant. So they kind of were like, we should separate here and
with Glen's
minimize.
Baby. Unclear.
Unclear. But yes.
Was this one from before Ida?
Unclear exactly the timing. I think so.
Who was the first wife? Edna.
Oh, just you wait till you hear the names. So the
Ruth.
first wife, yes, it's Edna Ruth. Went by Ruth.
And she went. Okay.
Then Ida, EDA, is the second wife, and then spoiler alert, he gets married again to another woman named Ruth.
That's not confusing at all.
No, I'm not kidding. When ask questions because there's lots of names in here.
I will continue to do so.
What does this guy look like? I feel like I need a little visual of him.
So he is not attractive, to put it nicely, but I guess he just was really, especially for the people that he was talking to, he was well educated and well spoken. And I think he just had a way with words that attracted the women because he apparently had no trouble getting a hold of all these women. So in addition to the affair, I hesitate to call it affair with Sandy because she's 16, but Glenn also kind of served as a father figure for her, and he gave her lots of direction, including how to get, are you guys all Googling what he looks like? Because either you're really uninterested in what I'm saying or you're Googling.
He looks like he should be part of the Three Stooges.
Yes.
This is like Larry, Curly, and Moe I'm looking at.
Yes.
This is not what I expected.
And there are no better pictures. I know exactly what picture
Can I
you're
see
looking
your
at.
picture? Because I don't think I'm looking at the right picture. I was not looking at the right picture.
What is this
guy.
hairstyle?
Oh, that's not him.
No. No. Let me see yours again.
That guy looks intimidating. He looks like a dentist in
Yeah.
in the pictures.
And he
with slightly
really
more hair.
did. He really did.
I like the single tuft of hair in the middle of his
Yep.
head that he sort of parts to the side.
Yeah, so not attractive, and the Three Stooges description is unbelievably accurate. We will of course post this on the Instagram at Grim Crime Podcast.
He must have had a good personality.
Well, no,
But we know
literally.
he didn't.
No,
It
exactly.
was really neat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, and at the time, like, especially in this area, like being a dentist was like way. Everyone else was doing like factory jobs and the union, the electric company, and all that, and he had this fancy job, and he was
He's an entrepreneur.
Yep. So Sandy, again, Ida's 16-year-old niece, they were, I hate to call it an affair. It's not really that when she's 16, but he also was this father figure to her. So he, in addition to just general life advice, was helping tell her how to get a man to marry her and take care of her.
While he's having an affair with her, he wants her to get married.
Yeah, he was like giving her tips. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. But
So I guess the affair is like literally meaningless to him.
yes. Yep.
Just okay.
Yep. So he introduces her to Eric Frey, the friend that Melody met. And Eric and Sandy were married on September 28th, 1962, and Sandy was only 18. So pretty young. Now, once married, Sandy tried to take out a bunch of insurance on Eric and herself. So much so that they actually couldn't even pay the premium and it was canceled. But Melody thought it was a good idea to have insurance on everyone at the drag strip because none of them really knew what they were doing.
Were they racing or running it?
They were running it, and it wasn't actually even open yet. They were setting it up. It was this big plot of land, and they were like clearing trees and clearing land and all that.
Okay.
And honestly, it was kind of a good idea because that land was kind of dangerous. Like there was an old well on it, and the kids in the family would play in the well. So Glenn suggested, I'm like, not great.
I just simultaneously got visions of The Ring and Lassie, which those two are very different from one another.
Yep. I'm not sure which type of well it is, if it's the Lassie type or the
Samara
Ring.
might be down there. I don't know.
Yeah,
Who knows?
exactly. Well, not for long because Glenn suggested that they fill it in, which made a lot of sense.
Yes.
So on September 26, 1963, and you can probably guess when I'm giving a specific date, it's not just a random day. But Glenn, Jack, so that's the childhood friend, Nick, that's like the apprentice kid, and Gene, Glenn's brother, went down to work on this. Apparently, Eric helped out as well because he had a lot of experience with dynamite with his time in the military. So they were like, oh, we'll just blow it up and cave it all in and then nobody can fall down in it. So they set it up and they went to wait from a safe distance while Eric finished the actual setup and set off the charge, but it didn't go off. So Glenn went to check on him and the others saw the explosion go off. Glenn was okay, but they couldn't find Eric. And then they kind of, after some searching, found that he had been hit by the blast and was buried in like a bunch of debris. Obviously they called 911 and all that, but Eric was dead. Nothing we could do. And Eric's death was ruled accidental. So that left Sandy, who was now pregnant, a widow at 19 years old.
Did she get that sweet life insurance policy?
She sure did. She called in actually the same day as Eric's death to get that, and then donated $16,000 of it to the drag strip, and then used the rest to establish a life for her and her baby, who happened to look a lot like Glenn. And the drag strip went
Can't imagine
bankrupt.
why.
How old was Eric at the time of his death? Do you know?
I don't have a quick reference on
I
this
think
one.
he was around 27 before, so like add
no, that
2,
was-
carry the 1.
That was James.
29. Oh boy.
But
I tried.
he was probably about the same. I think he wasn't way older, but I think he was probably in his 20s.
Okay. I was just curious.
Are you calculating? Are you
Well,
doing actuarial work
There
over
are
there?
there are a lot of names in here, and I was trying to stare at Fallon to get her to stop breathing heavy on the podcast. So I got a little confused because I thought she was married to Glenn's childhood friend. Okay, so that's what I was trying to
They
do.
just happened to have Jack was the childhood friend, and he just helped with all this stuff. I'm not sure
Okay.
why I included that detail, but I did.
Eric was Melody's friend, right?
Correct. Yes.
And Melody
Is the sister.
The sister.
Yep.
Of who?
Glenn. This is like a test. I mean, I've been reading a lot, so
I really though appreciate as you're going through it, you're like Glenn, the dentist,
Yeah.
and Melody, the sister.
Seriously,
just
and
the little subtitles
yeah,
are really helpful.
Good. I will keep doing that.
Okay, thank you.
So yeah, so Eric was young. Sandy was also even younger, and she did collect that life insurance payout, and that gave her better life for her and her baby, which, as I said, looked a lot like Glenn.
Okay.
And the drag strip was a bust. It went bankrupt like the year after. So for all that, just pointless.
Did they drag race at all?
I think they did. They did open, and I'm not sure who was coming to this to race. But I guess Glenn, when he originally thought of this idea, he knew that it was a popular sport and this particular area didn't have a lot. So it was actually not a bad idea to open. He just clearly couldn't manage the money.
This was his field of dreams. He was hoping if he built it, they would in fact come. He was ready.
Yes.
And they didn't.
They did
No,
not
they
come.
did not. All right, so get ready for some more names. With Sandy out of the picture, Glenn had been carrying on an affair with another Ruth. This woman, Ruth Jolly, was her maiden name.
Was he with all of them at the same time? So he's with Ida,
Lots of overlap.
Ida, the S one,
Yeah, Sandy
Sandy, and
Ruth.
now Ruth.
Yes, exactly.
Where is he finding the time with all these businesses and women?
He probably he was very dedicated to his appointment book. So
Yeah.
just pencil it in there. you know.
Apparently.
And a lot of it, actually, he had a lot of the affairs like literally in the office. So that's why, because Sandy was a dental assistant and
Convenient.
actually Ruth, sorry, see, I can't even keep him straight, was a dental patient. So that's how he met her.
Also convenient.
And this also may be unsurprising, but his marriage with Ida had deteriorated. Yeah, I wonder why. I don't know why. But so he divorced Ida in 1965, and he literally, like, physically threw her out of the house with like things. Like, imagine a movie where you like throw the stuff out after her. And shortly after, he and Ruth Jolly were married in April 1967. So we're on the third wife now.
It's a sweet last name though.
Yeah. Yep. And it became Engleman, which she probably regretted. And they were a match for one another. I don't know how this happened, that she happened to go to him for dental care, and she has her own trouble. So she participated in some scams that Glenn was running and actually even suggested some of her own. So they were doing things like counterfeiting money and all sorts of other insurance scams, just any way to get above the law.
You know what they say? A couple that breaks the law together stays together.
They didn't stick together.
Disproven.
So they're not Bonnie and Clyde. Duly noted.
No. And they had been living at Glenn's mother's house, but Glenn's mother had passed, so they ended up moving to a condo. And again, while they were well matched, they weren't happy. Not terribly surprising. One of the reasons for this unhappiness was that Ruth, so from now on, Ruth will probably be referring to the third wife. I will tell you if it's not. But Ruth had suspected that Glenn was having an affair with Carmen. Carmen is Nick's, so remember Nick, the apprentice kid that Glenn had known, for a long time, family friend. Carmen is the little sister, so he knew them, from the time Carmen was born. So Ruth thought that Glenn was having an affair with her. Carmen herself had a tough life. That whole family really did. They didn't have a lot of money, and Glenn kind of like, he is, if you haven't picked it up, incredibly arrogant and really thought he was better than everyone else. So he like adopted this family, like, I'm gonna help them out, and like not in a nice way, in a like I'm better than you kind of way. And so Carmen had dropped out of high school in 10th grade because she got pregnant. Maybe you see where this is going. She went to Glenn for an abortion, and her sisters actually brought her in secret. Now, I mentioned Glenn was not a good dentist. He was also not good at abortions. Oh, no. So it went so badly that like after she went home, she bled for hours and hours and hours, like to the point where she would have bled to death if her mother hadn't been like, what's going on here, and brought her to the hospital. So then she decided to work for Glenn as a dental assistant.
Because
why
he
not?
did such a good job performing
Exactly.
her medical procedure. She definitely wanted to work for him.
Exactly. So Glenn denied any affair, and Carmen eventually married a man named Peter Halm Halm. I don't know how to. It's like calm. Calm. Home. Okay. Carmen knew Peter from high school, and similar to the situation with Sandy, Glenn had encouraged this marriage. So Glenn, in addition to questionable affair, he denies a lot of it, but I'm 100% sure things happened.
So he's just like banging people and playing matchmaker at the same time.
Again, it's all this like control, like I'll tell you who to marry and how to please your man and all that, like really creepy stuff.
What a service to the community he's providing.
I told you he was a pillar.
Yeah, he really wants to help his community.
Indeed. So Carmen and Peter married on October 31st, 1975. But this marriage will be short-lived.
Shocking.
Yeah.
Did she happen to take out a life insurance policy on him?
She did. It's just so weird that
Just
you would
wondering.
have guessed that out of the blue.
Just wondering.
It was a warm Sunday afternoon when she, on September 5th, 1976, so this was a year after they were married, Carmen and Peter were walking through a wooded park that Carmen had brought Peter to. She wanted to show him, I guess there were some caves, and she really wanted to show him and go for a walk. As they're walking, Peter suddenly drops to the ground. He had been shot. Carmen looks around for the source of the gunshot, but didn't see anyone. Calls for help. There's people, nearby. They try to help, but Peter has died. Nick the brother was in California. He had gone out to like try to be a movie star or something like that in California. And he had come home when his family called and told him what happened to his sister and her husband. So Carmen was so distraught that Nick and his family actually hospitalized her for several weeks because they thought that she was going to commit suicide. And after she was out, Nick actually brought her back to California with him because there was a lot of press, a lot of, crazy stuff. And Nick took care of all the paperwork, including the $75,000 insurance payout that she got. And Peter's death remained unsolved. He had been shot by an unknown assailant, was what it said.
Okay, so we're hearing this story not in a vacuum. We're hearing it as a tale. So we're like, okay, we sort of know what happened. Can you imagine just going for a walk in the park and the person you're walking with just drops down and they have a gunshot wound and you don't ever know where it came from?
And there was obviously they had the bullet, but they had nothing. It was like a .22 caliber, like nothing to go by other than that.
That's wild.
Yeah. So, and you make a good point. Like I am obviously telling you these in order, and you can kind of see a theme maybe coming out. But if you saw just one of these things happen, I mean, there's no evidence. There's nothing you can do. Carmen doesn't know what's going on. She's having a really hard time. What can you do? So, all right. So we said he had been shot by an unknown assailant. Unfortunately, that would also be the case of 2 more murders that I'm going to tell you about. This is now in 1977. This is Vernita and Arthur Goosewell. It's Gusewelle.
I want it to be Goosewell, so that's what it is.
Yeah, and that's also definitely how I'm going to pronounce it. So the couple, 55 and 71, respectively, were shot in cold blood at their home on November 3rd, 1977. Arthur survived long enough to call 911, and when help arrived, they found Vernita lying face down in the kitchen. She had died, and her watch had stopped at 6:50 p.m. due to the blood running over it, which I thought was super chilling.
Oh, that's devastating.
And these are just, anyone who knew these people, incredibly nice people. They're not doing any crimes. They're not doing anything bad. They're like grandparents. Like there's no reason anyone would be out to kill them.
Although he was definitely robbing the cradle because 20-year difference is a lot.
Yeah.
A beautiful love story, but I just had to.
Not what I thought you were going to, not the direction I thought you were going to go.
If that's your thing, we support your May-December relationship. Do you?
I love it.
Where did you think I was going to go?
I don't know, but not there. Well, you said robbing, and I thought you were going to go into like how they were shot. But
like it was staged to look like a robbery or something. Yeah. Okay, so but we don't know yet how these 2 people fit into the bigger picture of the story. Like they don't.
Correct.
We don't know if they know Glenn or if they were patients of Glenn or anything like that.
Correct.
Okay.
So unfortunately, Vernita, of course, had died. She had been shot at close range in the head. And they found Arthur in the next room. He was barely alive. The house had actually been ransacked, but nothing was stolen. So like there were, the watch was on the ground, like his watch, his wallet, but nothing was stolen kind of thing.
When people fake a crime scene, can I just ask why they don't actually take something?
Yep.
Even if you just take it, even if you don't want it, just to throw people off.
Agreed.
Right.
Agreed.
Grim rule.
Yeah. Add it to that.
Live, learn, and stay out of jail, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. We're just trying to help. So there were no signs of forced entry also, interestingly. And all Arthur could say was 2, like the number 2. And police thought this implied that maybe it was 2 people. So unfortunately, Arthur also succumbed to his wounds once he arrived at the hospital, and he passed away as well. So authorities had notified the Goosewells' next of kin, their 2 sons, Rich and Ron. Rich lived in the house behind his parents. So when you hear that, you're like picturing our kinds of neighborhoods, which are a lot closer. You're like, did you hear that? But they had 600 acres. So they were not very close, because this part of Missouri, was lots of farmland, lots of open space. So they lived close, but not close.
Yeah, I wouldn't even consider them neighbors.
No.
If that's the standard, that I'm neighbors with my mom who lives 10 minutes across town.
Exactly. And then actually Ron was a couple houses up. But again, that could be like 3 miles, who knows, with his wife, Barbara. And that would be the same Barbara with whom Glenn was having an affair years ago.
I can't keep all his mistresses straight.
That's okay.
Okay.
Sounds like he might have not been able to either.
Seriously. And so that was Vernita and Arthur. So Ron's parents.
Okay.
The Goosewells. And Ron is married to Barbara, who had an affair with Glenn years before. So that's where we're at right now.
Okay.
Only a couple years later, Ron would find himself meeting the same fate. So Ron was, by all accounts, a great salt of the earth, as Mike would say, kind of guy. He worked hard at his blue-collar job at the oil refinery and lived in the same town that he grew up in. He had met Barb, who she really belonged in LA, and not this place. Like, she was blonde hair, like curls, red fingernails, red lipstick, always done up, not really fitting the mold. And they had met at a Denny's and then again at a laundromat, and it was fate. And it was a quick courtship, and they married in 1976, just a year before Ron's parents were murdered. So they had all just kind of met. And Ron's own murder would occur on March 31st, 1979, so just 3 years later. On that fateful day, he had gone to work in a Camaro. He was fixing it up for Barb's daughter. That was from a previous marriage with the dentist that Glenn knew. It was a Saturday night shift. Typically, he and his work buddies would go out for a beer after they got out, but he got a call at work around 9 p.m. and said he would have to go straight home. So that's what his work buddies said. Not that big a deal. That's fine. Ron's dead body would be found 5 days later in that same Camaro, parked outside of a seedy hotel on the other side of town in a place very well known for prostitutes.
Like, no one saw him for 5 days?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep. And Barb did call in and reported him missing. So she had called friends that night because he's usually punctual, and then called the police in the morning. So they knew they were looking for him, couldn't find him. He had been shoved in the car so violently that his leg had been broken, and he had a bullet wound to the chest, and his head was nearly entirely caved in.
Wow.
It wasn't until 7 months later that a man named Andre Jones, in prison for another murder, confessed to killing the family. Came out of nowhere, huh? Barb, however, was doing okay. She got a lot of money from this. She had about $200,000 in insurance, which, reminder, this is back in 1979. So this was like almost $2 million today.
Oh.
Okay. Yep. And then she got benefits. Ron had a really good job. So she got benefits from that. And then she also got Ron's share of his parents' estate, because they had split that between the boys, and that was another $200K. So all around about $500,000, which is about $5 million today. So she's doing all right.
She made out much better than the woman who got $75,000.
Sure did.
For her husband being shot in the park.
Yep. So the last murder I'm going to tell you about today is that of Sophie Marie Barrera. She owned a dental lab not too far from Glenn's office. And her lab actually provided Glenn with dental devices, so like bridges and
Okay. Yep.
other dental devices.
Crowns.
Yes.
Yeah.
Things you put in your mouth.
Yes. Yes. And that was from the molds that he gave her. So, but remember, Glenn is a bad dentist. So he would be like lazy and really bad at creating the molds. So they'd have to do it a bunch of times and it wouldn't be correct. It would take longer. So she charged him more, understandably. But Glenn didn't think that was reasonable. So he refused to pay. And Sophie was suing him for $15,000 because that's what he owed her for everything.
Go so.
All those dental devices.
I don't know what to call them. Dental devices. Yeah. Prior to the event that would actually take her life, someone had actually tried to kill Sophie with a bomb outside her garage in 1979.
This is a very violent.
It is.
Yeah.
time.
You are
Yep.
not messing around. When you said this was a soap opera, this is
Yep.
like scripted soap dreaming.
Literally. Yeah. It was 8 sticks of dynamite, so that's like a ton of dynamite. I didn't do the math there, but it's a ton. And
How much is a lot of dynamite?
how much is too much dynamite? But unfortunately, it had been, well, fortunately for Sophie, it had been soaked by rain and didn't explode, so it never went off, or like part of it went off, and it was harmless. It was just in the backyard. But she was weirdly unfazed by this. She was just like, yeah, if someone's got to go, it'll be me. Like,
Very calm.
okay.
Also, does
for you.
does Wile E. Coyote live in this
There's
town
an
in
anvil.
Missouri? Are
There's an
there
anvil
anvils
next.
involved?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. But unfortunately, she was right. It would be her. So
When you know, you know.
exactly. Well, she didn't know, or perhaps she wouldn't have gotten in her car. On January 14th, 1980, she was leaving her office, 4:45 in the afternoon. She got into her Ford Pinto and put it in reverse.
And it blew up.
And when her tires rolled backwards, thank you for that, it rolled over a homemade car bomb.
Oh, man.
So
I was actually kind of joking.
yep, no, it did. Yep. So the way that Susan writes this in the book, you actually think it's going to be like when she turns the key.
Right.
You're like,
thought-
oh,
I
okay,
did
that's
think
not what
that.
it's going to be. Nope. It was under the tire and it went off. And speaking of the book that I read, I'm actually going to read the description from there because I found myself trying to pull parts of it and I just want to say it directly from the book because it really paints a picture. And I mean, as with all of my cases, you've probably figured out that this is gruesome. But trigger warning if you don't want to hear about.
It might be. Is it grim too?
It is indeed grim, insidious. So
Very grave.
yes, it's a murder.
Murder.
So
Is there a mystery?
Not really a mystery, but okay. So the blast shattered the windows in the adjacent buildings, scattered glass and pieces of Sophie over the street. It sent the steering wheel of the Pinto onto the 6th floor roof of a nearby apartment building. Flying debris shot holes in the windshields of cars. Bits of flesh and blood were pasted on the Diplomat apartments like bugs plastered to the windshield of a car on an open road. Sophie's feet were severed from her body and landed separately, with stockings in place from the arch down and toenail polish unchipped. Oh. A piece of an ear with the earring still attached would be found 100 feet away from the car the next day. The largest remaining piece of Sophie, her head and torso, arms, and right hand, hung outside the car. Her face was singed, and at the moment the blood had abruptly drained out of her body, its expression was one of anger and surprise.
Which is, I think, the expression that's
Yep.
on my face.
Yep.
Yeah.
Anger
I
and
really
surprise.
couldn't look up and see what you guys were doing while I read that, but I imagined it.
I was just picturing, like, I don't know, being at like Mohegan Sun and looking out the beautiful hotel glass window,
Yeah.
and there's like an eyeball on
Yep.
the window.
It basically was that bad.
That is
yeah.
gruesome.
Yep.
Feels
Yep.
like overkill. Like that car bomb was like excessively strong.
Yes, definitely. Well, you can maybe surmise that the last attempt failed, so we were very sure that this one would work.
Yep.
The coroner's report would describe her death as "quote unquote" caused by massive explosion and injury of abdomen and lower extremities. And anyone near enough to her mutilated corpse knew that the technical description was inadequate. It was bad. So her son, so Sophie's son, actually used to be a dental lab assistant and worked in an office nearby, also at a dental lab. I'm not sure why they each had one. And so he was able to come over and I guess identify the car. But so interestingly, he was actually initially suspected of it because he like didn't react to the her remains and seeing everything. So they were as confused as Marina is right
Oh my
now.
gosh, that's so hard though. And we've talked about that before, how everyone processes grief differently. And I feel like some people would just shut down and can't even process the emotions. And they're like, oh, you did it.
And that's basically what happened. Was he just like, he said it wasn't real. Like she was just playing baseball with his kid the week before, you know,
Right.
so it was that kind of
And it sounds
reaction.
like her face was sort of okay, right?
Yeah.
Like she was just like destroyed from the torso down.
So he was able to identify. Yeah. Cause it was like underneath the car.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yikes.
So even though the son was initially suspected, they realized that's not him. And Engleman, so Glen, was immediately identified as a suspect by a
Good.
number of people because
Because of the lawsuit, right?
exactly, because they all knew about the
Okay.
lawsuit. So the investigative team led by Detective Bill McGarvey, who you're going to love. I won't go in as much detail as the book does, but he is amazing and figures everything out. He picked up Glen and ended up talking to him because, it made sense. Glen was willing enough to talk and in fact boasted about his knowledge of bomb making and discussed how although he wasn't responsible, he was glad Sophie was dead.
Oh, Glenn, so many mistakes were made.
You think that maybe that was like a tactic where if he was like, if I say really dumb things, they'll be like, he can't be that dumb to have killed her and say the dumb things.
I don't think it was quite that good, but I think he thought that he was so above the law that he just could boast about things and brag about things and they would never think about him as a suspect.
Hiding in plain sight.
Yep.
Can you imagine being a murder suspect and you're like, I love guns. Yeah. Love them. Can't get enough of them.
Yep.
Need more guns.
Love
Exactly.
bombs. I didn't make this bomb, but if I was
But it's a
gonna make a
great
bomb,
bomb.
this was excellent. Like
Yep.
grade A bomb right here.
Actually, he even said, if I were going to kill her, I wouldn't even have placed the bomb myself. I would have had somebody else do it. So he is playing completely into that.
Okay.
Yep.
It's a tactic.
It is. It did not work. Another spoiler alert, but we'll get there. So a few days later, the detectives are working through all their leads. They're trying to figure out. They've been talking to Glen. He's looking bad, but they're talking to try to figure out and piece together. Because although they knew about the lawsuit, it was a very extreme way of killing. So they're like, there's probably more here.
Well, how much was she suing him for? $15,000. So they're kind of looking at like, okay, 15,000 versus like how epic this occurrence was.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. And she was suing him. Like it hadn't even finished.
Right.
So it's not like he did owe her, but I guess that would have been pretty easy to know how that outcome of that would have gone. But anyway, so they're working through the leads. And so McGarvey visits Ruth. So again, that's Glen's third ex-wife. So they had, I don't think I mentioned it earlier, but they were not able to overcome their differences and they did divorce. But they didn't they divorced on paper, but they basically acted as if they were married. So Glen didn't live at the house, but he was there all the time. He talked to her all the time. They definitely are still having sex and like all that. And they had a kid who was at this time 10 years old. So he would come and they would like have family dinners and for all intents and purposes, they were still married, but they were officially divorced. So when McGarvey came to visit Ruth, she was at home with their son, and Ruth had told the police that Glen really loved his son, but had a weird obsession with making him a man, meaning after 14, he said, quote, a boy no longer needs his mother past that age. And so Ruth had concerns about like what Glen was going to do at that because David was 10 at this point. So very strange given his own obsession with his mother. That really perplexed me, and they didn't really go into any further detail other than that was a thing that stressed Ruth out a lot about Glen because she, as we'll learn in a moment, was very concerned about what he is capable of doing.
Okay.
So Ruth was really nervous when she was talking to McGarvey. She didn't want to tell anyone anything, but something about him made her trust him. So she finally admitted, and I'm quoting her, meaning Glen, he's threatened to kill me. He's let me know that my life isn't valuable to him after David gets a little older, and he'll do it, kill me. He's done it before. He's killed people before, more than Sophie. You just don't know. But they were about to know.
When did she say that, and who did she say that to?
So that
Police?
was to the police. Yep, when they went to after Sophie's the bomb murder, they went to talk to basically everybody they could related to Glen to see if they could piece something together. And after really being hesitant about it, Ruth is like, "All right, well, you asked. I'm going to tell you. He's definitely capable."
Well, she's right to be nervous because she was aware that he had killed before,
Yes.
and her son would probably be the benefactor of some sort of a life insurance policy.
Yep.
So the kid is going to become a man, not need his mom anymore, and have a nice little inheritance that he's going to get.
That's exactly right. So what I'm going to go through now, Glenn had actually confided all of his past transgressions to Ruth. So she knew everything. And over the course of, I think months, I think it was a long time, she revealed all of this to McGarvey and the other detectives. Glenn really loved to tell her all this, like, during or after sex. It's just what they did. So she has all the details of all the murders since 1958. So what I'm going to do now is take you all the way back to the beginning, and just give you a few more details about those murders I told you about.
Ruth's taste in men, I'm perplexed why she has not, like, taken her son and just gotten the hell out of Dodge here, because if she is aware of what he's done before, like, she's definitely the next victim on the list.
I think that's what she was actually grappling with, like, before all this happened, was she was financially dependent on Glenn. So that was problem number one.
Yep.
And I think it was, like, probably, like, she wasn't great. She was, like, participating in some of this early on. And then afterwards, I think she thought that by keeping David close to Glenn and, like, you know, kind of playing along nice, it kind of kept her safe. But I think that 0 hour at 14 years old, she was nervous about what would happen. So I think she was dealing with all that. And I think that's why she just, like, let the floodgates go and told the police everything.
This was the first out, I guess, that she could have safely taken.
And they did promise her, obviously, witness protection program and all that. So, like, I think once she kind of realized, like, she could actually have this safe life with her and her son, she was all about it. So she was an excellent witness and participant in all of this. So she tells police. So we're going way back to 1958. So if you remember,
where were we before?
80s?
1980. Yep.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
All right.
So back in 1958, Glenn had divorced the first Ruth, if you remember, so that he could instruct her who to marry. So he specifically picked someone that had a good job with good benefits, but in his words, not so rich that it would be suspicious. So he was extremely thoughtful about this, and that's why he picked James Bullock, who had worked at the electric company. It was a nice, comfortable job. It had great benefits, but it wasn't, you know, millions and millions.
I have a question, and if you're going to get to it, you can just tell me to wait. But were the women involved with this? Like, did they... So they knew exactly what was going on? Because when you talked about the woman, and I'm sorry, you might be getting to this, but when you talked about the woman walking in the park...
She brought her husband there.
Okay.
I was wondering that.
They are. Yep.
I couldn't help myself. I was so excited about the information.
And it's in varying degrees of accomplice. Like, they, you know, some of them are really into it and some of them are more hesitant, and all of them are under his spell.
So was her act, the one in the park that brought the husband there, wasn't she the one that, like, needed to go stay with the brother in California?
Yes.
So she was acting very well, or...
What?
Well, she was sort of, like, over dramatizing the situation.
A goodly act.
Oh,
she was acting very goodly.
Kind of. We'll get to her in a moment.
Either that or she didn't fully understand that something was going to happen literally in front of her.
More of that side. So we're talking about the first murder now. This is with the original Ruth, and this was James Bullock, who was the one who was shot outside the art museum.
Okay.
So Glenn had instructed Ruth exactly who to pick. Like, he picked out James, and then told her how to get the right insurance on him and all that stuff. So he was orchestrating that from start to finish, and it was clearly successful. And the story repeats itself. So again, Glenn had that affair. I put it in quotes because Sandy was very young, but he had that relationship with her. Same thing, instructed her on who to marry. That was Eric Frey, and then planned to kill him. And remember, Eric was helping with filling that well in at the drag strip. So when the explosives didn't go off, Glenn did go down to check on him, but Eric was alive and well. And Glenn hit him over the head with a rock and then held him underwater to drown him.
And then set the bomb off?
Yes,
didn't it go off?
It did. So Glenn also had experience with explosives, and so he was able to do all that, and then, like, covered Eric's body in rocks to make it look like he was it was a result of the explosion.
Diabolical.
Yep. And Sandy, of course, received the insurance payout and split it with Glenn.
So that's what he got for this was the drag race contribution money.
Exactly. Yep.
Did they not have autopsies? Because wouldn't you think the cause of death between explosion versus drowning would be? I feel like you'd notice.
You would if the body hadn't been cremated as per request from Sandy the day after.
Okay.
Yep. You are exactly right. So they couldn't because he had been cremated.
What is it that you say, Marina? What is it no body, no?
I was like, which one of the things are we talking about? Fish
Snitches
fillets?
get the one.
Are we talking about snitches get stitches? Like, what are we talking about here?
So many Marinaisms.
So many. But that's interesting because I'm pretty sure that there is a law in Connecticut that there's like automatic autopsies in certain situations, and I think that would qualify so that you wouldn't just.
I would agree. I mean, so this was I think that one was like in the 70s. So I think it was also that law probably wasn't around. And I think it was.
Well, it was also Missouri and not Connecticut. I'm just thinking like, yeah.
You would think.
It was way easier to murder people in the 50s,
That's
60s,
where I almost
70s,
I almost
80s.
started this episode with that comment. Yeah. Yep. So now we're up to Carmen, the one who was walking in the park with her husband. So again, Glen had known this family their whole lives, like they were family friends is a loose term, but he had been grooming Carmen her whole life basically. So he had same thing as Sandy, same thing as Ruth. He had been telling Carmen what kind of man to marry, and so Carmen, it was interesting you asked like why she was so upset and how much she was involved in this, because I think he manipulated her maybe the most out of anyone because she had known him for so long. Her brother was really close to him. And Glen told her that the insurance would pay for her mother to have her own house. So like he kind of she didn't even want the money really for herself. Right. She was uncomfortable with the entire thing and actually she lied to Glen and didn't take out the insurance that he told her to. She did some of it, but I mean, he was saying a lot because he's now committed a few murders and he's comfortable. And so she didn't take them all out. But Glen and Carmen had discussed the possible suitors and they picked Peter for the same reason that he had Ruth pick James. Great job, steady. And interestingly, Glen had actually tried to kill Peter several times before. And Glen had roped in his friend Bob Handy, roommate of Don Horton, who was the one who married the witness that was going to report the illegal abortions. So I was not kidding when I said it's like a web. Bob Handy is going to be an important person later, so you can forget Don's name and focus on Bob. So one time Glen and Bob are in the woods behind, even I forgot the names, behind Peter's house. But they were going to go in and kill him, but then like a dog started barking at them, so they couldn't do it then. And this other time, Peter and Carmen are driving across a covered bridge, and Carmen is like, oh, we should get out and look at the bridge and do all that because Glen was going to kill him, but then there were like other kids and people walking, so he couldn't do it then. So that's when Glen finally brought Carmen to show her the place in the woods with the caves that he was going to bring Peter. So
Final Destination.
Yeah.
Like this guy survived.
He did.
A few times.
Yeah, actually, Glen had called him a cat with 9 lives because he had tried to kill him so many times. But because of all of this, Carmen was so sick after the murders. That's why she was in this really dark place. Nick took care of all of it for her. Glen only got paid $10,000 out of this, which again is, a lot more in today's dollars, but still it's not an outrageous amount.
It's a lot of work.
Exactly.
He had so many attempts for only 10,000 because you
Yep.
got more from some of the other less complex.
Yep. And she said she didn't think he'd actually go through with it. But in the book, Susan goes into a lot of detail on the actual day of, and I think she kind of talks about what Carmen was thinking, and Carmen is, when Peter's actually shot, she's just like, I can't believe he did it. I can't believe this is happening, and kind of in shock. So Nick takes care of everything and actually kept the remaining amount of the $75,000 payout for himself, which makes him sound bad, but he's actually really not a bad character in this. And Glen used the money he got to resolve a dispute with the IRS. So that tends to happen when you don't pay your taxes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Ruth, again, this is the third ex-wife telling all of these details to the police. Ruth explains that Glen had partnered with Barbara, so that was the woman he had the affair with, to pick out Ron and his parents because they had a good amount of money. So this was a long time that they were working on this. Glen called Barbara his golden girl because she was going to get the most money for him. She was also, speaking of involvement, the most involved in the murders. Like she, I would say, is just as bad as Glenn. She was excited by all this. She was like really proud that she had identified these people. And even the night of the murder of the parents, so these are the grandparents of Barb's kids, she sent her kids over to make sure they were home. Like it really, she was
Murder
very
is
involved.
a team sport.
Indeed. So, and that night later, Glenn and Bob posed as people from the Farm Bureau, which I guess there's just a Farm Bureau. I don't know. I don't know what that is. But Vernita and Artha did, which were the grandparents, and that's why they let them in. Because
You got a little Boston just for a second
what did
there
I
when
say?
you said like it was like Artha. I didn't even I heard it.
Didn't even hear it. Artha.
Yeah.
No, I can't do it. So then years later, Glenn conspired with Barb to murder Ron, as I told you. This one really upsets me because she was so involved in it. So Glenn and Bob had parked their car at a nearby shopping plaza so that it wouldn't be at the house. Barb picks them up and brings them back to the house, and they wait for Ron to get home. Barb had sent the kids away, which I guess is good. But when Ron opened the garage door, because of course, Barb's side of the door of the garage opens automatically and his doesn't because he did everything for Barb. And so when he opens the garage door, that's when Glenn shoots him and then hits him in the head with the sledgehammer. And Barb was just there to get some towels to help, the pooling blood and helps them get who am I talking about here? helps him get Ron into the car. And she is left to clean up everything. And
Super helpful.
Yeah. Yep. And so, that's when Bob and Glenn put him in the Camaro and his leg breaks, and then they, get the car and bring him to the hotel. And it turns out that the confession from the other murderer, who confessed to this murder, was just a coincidence. So I'll talk more about that in a minute, but it's like Glenn literally was like, well, that was lucky.
It was not part of the plan.
No, it was not part of the plan.
Okay.
We'll hear a little more about that later. And then in the last murder, the one that I originally wrote, this was out of sequence for him, but he did get money from Sophie's because Sophie's murdered the car bomb because he didn't have to pay the $15,000. So arguably that was for money as well. So those are some of the details of all of this. So now the police know all this and they're like, holy fucking shit. What if I just, because now you're hearing this all in an hour, and
Yeah.
the police are hearing this I can only imagine what this was like hearing. And they're like, well, that's a great story, lady, but how am I supposed to confirm this? So they start to confirm things. And everything she says is completely true. She's been this excellent witness. So they're like, all right, well, that's all great, but they were married during this. And you may know about this, but
Spousal privilege.
Yep. So they're like, well, shit. So they decide to wire her, which at first she was wire the house, and they were incredibly nervous because Glenn is really good with all this kind of stuff and was responsible for all the wiring in the house and would have known if something was off. But they decide to risk it, and it really is not fruitful. It's really hard to hear in the recording. So this is, the early 80s. Things are not as good as what you're hearing right now. But, so they couldn't hear that. And then they would put it in one of the devices they put in the bottom of the couch, and the cat was scratching at it and they couldn't hear. It was stupid things like that. So they decide, all right, the house isn't working out. We aren't getting anything. In addition to it being hard to hear, Glenn was paranoid. So I liken him to Tony Soprano, where he's got to put the air conditioner on to talk, wouldn't go in the same restaurants, wouldn't mention things. So not only was it hard to hear, but he wasn't admitting anything, even though Ruth kept trying to ask questions, which again wasn't uncommon. They would talk about it. So, they recall that Glenn tells Ruth everything in the bedroom.
Post-coital.
I did too just now. I was thinking, why
yeah.
don't they bug the bedroom?
Yep.
Because
Yeah.
he's going to be bragging on it.
So they did.
That was smart. My brain was like, how are they going to wire her if she's got to be naked? So,
And honestly, this is I'm reading this all fairly quickly, but the police did an unbelievable amount of work for this. It was day after day of trying to get this all to work, and you couldn't every day Ruth couldn't be so about those murders,
Right.
So there was kind of a nuance there. So they did bug the bedroom, and it Glenn would literally be like, why are you asking me these questions? Do you have it bugged? And they were just like, all right, this is a bad idea. She's going to get killed before we can even get anything.
Every day she was like, do you want to have sex? And he's like, wait a minute, something's wrong here.
Exactly. So he was getting suspicious, and like to the point where she couldn't naturally bring it up anymore because there was nothing, that they could, there was no reason to bring it up. So they actually worked with reporters to like have them quote unquote dig up old murders so that she could ask him about that. So they did all this. Again, he's just like, he's alluding, you're like implying it, but nothing concrete. So they're finally like, all right, we're going to try again. And so on Valentine's Day, actually, so this is all the same year. So Sophie's murder was in January 1980. We're only in February 1980. And so they put out more news stories, and Ruth asks about it, and they finally get on tape Glenn admitting to it. He admits that he and Carmen roughly figured him, meaning Peter, for $100K. And so now he was homicidally intimate with Carmen, and that was his thing. That's what he called it. Because Ruth kept being like, you're having an affair with her. And he was like, no, I'm just homicidally intimate with her. Literally, that's what he would say.
We just kill people together,
It's not
babe.
cheating.
Ew, he did say babe.
Ugh.
There's like, it's bad. Yeah.
Can I just say that my daughter called my husband babe the other day because
That's a
I
lot
always
cuter.
call him. She's like, babe, look at me. I'm like, you just call him babe.
That's way cuter. Way
I
cuter
know.
than Glenn doing it. She probably didn't say, like Glenn did, that he has no desire to keep killing his fellow man. That's
She
what
didn't
Glenn
say
said.
that.
She didn't
No.
say that?
No.
Okay. All right.
Not on
well,
her pirate ship. No way.
Glenn did say that. So this is enough, finally, for detectives. So at this point now, Ruth and David, so the kid, we're going to be put in the witness protection program. As an aside, I had to write this because it made me really sad in the book. They have a cat, and it's policy for the witness protection program that you can't bring your pets. And so David, like, as they're going out, this kid's 10. He's like, why can't we bring the pet? Or the cat? What did we do wrong? And it was really sad. But it's because they go to a lot of places that you can't have pets, and it's also like a very easy way to have your cover blown. So it's very unsafe. But it made me really sad. So I wanted you to
sad.
be sad with me.
That
Thank
poor
you.
I am
kid.
sad.
I know. Yeah. And the cat's name was Fluffy,
Aw.
which is really cute.
That's so grim.
It is. It is.
It's probably the thing in the
grave.
story that's made me the saddest is this
I
child
know.
losing his pet.
I know.
It wasn't. It wasn't the torso.
No.
It was the cat.
It was the cat.
That's
for me,
fair.
guys.
That's fair. That says a lot.
Yeah.
All right. So now, thanks to Ruth, the police have their key suspects. So now we can kind of forget somewhat about some of the other people. Now we're focused on Glenn, Nick, and Carmen, so the brother and sister, and Bob Handy. So Bob was really his handyman. He actually was a handyman.
I was thinking, really?
Yeah. Yeah. He followed, like, he was not very smart, and he kind of like saw Glenn as like, oh my God, he's so smart. I'll do anything. So I don't know why Glenn was so charismatic, but he was like this with people.
He would have been a great cult master, it sounds like.
Yes.
People just kind of blindly followed
Yes.
him, or he had a way with words to manipulate people.
Yeah.
He
exactly.
also would have been great at an MLM. Because
Yes,
he had
definitely.
the entrepreneurial spirit and the networking abilities, and he
Yes.
was willing to work for it.
All those women signed up under him.
Yep. And then they got their husbands to sign
Yeah,
up too.
exactly.
And then they killed the husband and stole their team.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's fine. It's good.
It tracks.
Yep. Okay. So that's Bob. So they want to charge Bob with mail fraud, which is because of the insurance. That's like how they get at this, is that it's receiving insurance illegally through the mail. I don't know. It's why. And then conspiracy to murder related to Peter's death. They had the most evidence and the most like key witnesses related to that death. The first one, there's like nothing. It was way long ago.
Yep.
The second one, Eric's body had been cremated, so they didn't have a lot. So this one, they had a lot. And Glenn had been indicted on 2 capital murder charges, Peter and then Sophie, so the bombing. So, and then for the Goosewall ones, which was the 2 grandparents and the son, we'll talk about that. They needed more, but we'll talk about that in a second. So they wanted to arrest all these people at the same time. They go to pick up Glenn, who didn't really object. He just was like, yep, okay.
He's like, all right.
I'm ready. Because again, he thinks he's above the law. So he's not fazed, not worried. They pick up Bob, who immediately is like, I want a lawyer. So he doesn't, like, from then on, he like doesn't talk.
It's really smart, though.
It
You
is.
should do that.
Exactly. Yes. It helped him for sure, because he just, he didn't say anything. And then they pick up Nick at Nick's house. And then they sent someone out to California to get Carmen. However, it turns out that their info was bad, and Carmen was literally in the living room when they picked up Nick. So they realized this like driving away, because they wanted to pick up everyone at the exact same time, the exact same day. So they're like getting a call from California that she's not there. Turns out whatever. So they turn around and get her too, putting her in the same car as Nick, which avoided the entire reason they wanted to get them separately. So Nick immediately is like, don't say anything. I will take care of it. Which, I mean, again, he did bad things and he participated, and he should have, I'm sure, said something earlier, but he actually is incredibly cooperative shortly, and I think he's actually really smart in the way that he handles all of this. So she says nothing. Bob's not talking, and Nick won't talk without a deal. So total props to him for some serious negotiation. They go back and forth, and he manages to get them to agree to let him and Carmen off scot-free in return for giving information. So, okay. He does hold to that. So again, you're in a bad situation, but he did everything right from then on. So now we're getting to the trials. The trials were split up. So the first trial was for Bob and Glenn, and that was on the mail fraud and conspiracy for Peter's murder. They had to go all the way up to Minnesota because there's so much publicity around that they couldn't hold a fair trial there. So they had strong witnesses, again, with Carmen, Nick, and Ruth, of course, is still giving all this information. They knew the type of gun. They had tracked that down and figured out that Bob had gotten that gun and given it to Glenn. They were also able to bring up the murder of Eric Frey, which was interesting. So I feel like in our last episode, or one of the episodes, we talked about how you couldn't mention a previous transgression, like something had happened previously and it was thrown out. So in this one, so that is typically the case, but they were able to bring in the Eric murder because it had happened almost in exactly the same nature and within a reasonable time period.
It's the modus operandi.
Oh, MO.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, that's what it stands for.
I knew that one. And so they actually struggled with the time period thing because it had happened 13 years prior. But they got agreement because of the delay in insurance payouts. So because it takes time to pay out, that they argued that it was actually closer. So it actually set new case law precedent. Wow. Just fun little grim fact.
So after this woman tied all these together, then they were able to match the ballistics?
They, well, not really. It wasn't even that detailed. They were able to just get a bunch of witnesses from this. And then I'm not sure how they tracked down the gun. Maybe they had that. Maybe they, I don't, because I think Glenn had destroyed the gun, but I think they knew that he had purchased one and Bob had given it to him. So,
again, it must have been way easier to kill people, because I'm pretty sure after the second murder, that would trigger, like when they did that ballistics, it would match that prior gun.
Oh, absolutely.
And they
probably
would be able to connect them all.
Yeah, you would think. But, and I actually, you bring up a good point, because I was actually surprised reading this. I mean, obviously you've heard this cast of characters, but it mostly was just witnesses. Like there was some physical evidence, but it mostly was just people talking, which I found, I mean, I guess if you have enough to corroborate everything, it's fine. But I was surprised that there was a lack of physical evidence in this. So through this whole trial, of course, Glenn is like super cocky. He's calm, cool, collected, maintained his innocence and also idiocracy, which is apparently what I was going to say. And, you know, again, he is this dentist that's clean cut. And so the jury deliberated for 12 hours. They did come back with Glenn being guilty, but only reason it took that long is one of the jurors literally couldn't believe that a dentist would do this. And of course, is seeing Glenn all like clean cut and everything. So for that first set of charges, so the mail fraud and the conspiracy, Glenn was sentenced to 30 years. And Bob was also found guilty and got 18 years for that. So the second trial, and this is all happening. So again, Sophie's murder happened in January of 1980. This is just later in the year 1980. So the second trial for Glenn was for the murder of Peter Halm. I'm sorry. I want to say Helm, and then that sounds terrible. Holm. Okay. So anyway, so on this, Glenn took the stand in this trial, in the trial for the murder of Peter, which was not a good idea.
It really never is.
Nope. He would give super long-winded, like preachy answers, again, thinking he's like above everyone and he's teaching everyone, to the point where they literally had to tell him to just answer the question. The prosecutor managed to actually rile up Glenn just by talking about David, because Glenn had actually implied that he had just lied about all these murders to Ruth to scare her so that she would let him see David more, which doesn't even make sense. But the prosecutor,
makes no sense
no, not at all. But the prosecutor used this, like, just get Glenn onto a rant. So Glenn worked himself into a frenzy about Ruth overprotecting David and all this stuff, and ultimately just like lost his shit on the stand and went complete. Is it Jekyll? Which one of Jekyll and Hyde is the bad one? Jekyll?
I think Jekyll.
Okay.
No, isn't it Hyde?
Oh.
Isn't it Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde?
Okay.
Isn't Mr. Hyde is the
So
evil
he
one?
went Hyde on the stand, and like was literally screaming. Like the judge had to make everyone stop, and the jury saw all of this, so it was perfect. So this combined with the actual evidence and testimony, the jurors found him guilty, and he was sentenced to life without parole for 50 years. Now, remember, there's many more things to be charged for. So his third trial, he had actually been tried and found guilty for federal bombing charges related to Sophie's murder in a different trial. So he's been through a lot of trials.
I guess.
I'm sure they had reasoning for having them separate, but that one was just on the federal bombing charges, and he got 30 years for that. But now we're talking about the actual trial for Sophie's murder. It was supposed to start in 1980, but ended up having a mistrial. I'm adding this because it's a really ridiculous way to have a mistrial. So the judge and the prosecutor were they're all in town for this. They're having dinner at a tavern. They happen to see the sheriff, who is supposed to be watching and managing, like, and sequestering the jury. He walks in with a member of the jury and meets up with the deputy, who was also supposed to be there having a drink. So the prosecutor just writes mistrial on a napkin, and then they go back to their dinner, which I just thought was a funny thing. So they go through all that. Now, once they actually had the trial, Glenn chose not to take the stand. Duh.
Wonder why after his very successful testimony previously.
Seriously. Now, it doesn't matter, because he is found guilty and sentenced to life. Now, but for the other murders, I guess in Missouri, the death penalty was not in place at the time of the earlier murders, and it had to have been in place at that time for him to be sentenced to death. But for Sophie's murder, it was. However, he was not sentenced to death, and the prosecutor theorized that was just because he hadn't actually placed the bomb. He had somebody else do it, and he thinks that was the line for the jurors. So he's collecting sentences at this point. So now we're on to the Goosewall murder. So that was the two grandparents and the son Ron, and that was now in association with that woman Barb. But remember, somebody had already confessed to that murder.
Yes.
Now everyone,
Angel?
yeah,
Is his name Angel?
Close, Andre.
Oh,
I'm impressed, given the names I've thrown at you, that you have any letters correct. So good job.
thank you.
But so everyone knew that it was Glenn and Barb that were associated with this, and they're like, who actually confessed to this? What's going on? But the person, Andre, who had confessed, actually recanted his confession, and he admitted that he had been bribed by a detective not related to the case, who happened to receive a couple of promotions out of it, and that he was given money, and also was told that he could hug his grandmother, because he previously could only see her through the glass. So he was like, yeah, hell yeah, I'll admit to this. So he recanted that. Now that they've got this confession out of the way, they needed someone to talk. The three key people were Glenn, Bob Handy, and Barbara. So Bob did eventually talk. So after all this, he had been sentenced to stuff, and he was like, hey, I'll talk if I can get some reduced jail time. I will say it is amazing that it took this long for Bob to talk, because he got literally nothing out of this. He went to jail a couple times. There was a time previously he went to jail on something that Glenn did. And he went to jail for this. Like, he got no money out of this. he didn't get a cent. He didn't even know how much money. He was just like, yeah, hell yeah, I'll murder
Like, I'll
somebody.
help you,
That's
good
fine.
buddy.
Yeah. So they used Bob's testimony plus evidence of Ron's blood in Barb's garage. So they went out there, and even though it had been years later and she had cleaned it up, they still were able to find it. They had, again, more witnesses and evidence. And actually, one of the pieces of evidence was that in the insurance policies that that Ron should have signed were actually signed in Barb's handwriting. So she was like really terrible. And that was enough to indict Barb for the murders as well. So not only was there's so many names. Not only was Glen being indicted for all this, but this one was so bad that Barb was actually, had a hand in this.
Good. She sucks. I've decided she's one of my least favorite supporting characters.
So
in
that
the story.
is also how I feel, because she it's something about imagining she literally just stood there as they murdered her husband and like was like, oh, get the towels. And that was actually a point of interest when they found Ron's body, that the towels were like these super nice plush towels. Or like, this did not come from a motel. And like the trash bags were the same as in her house. But again, it just was all circumstantial. So Barb was indicted. They had a really hard time finding her because she had money and was like planning to leave the country, but she was arrested. She was all the way in Florida. She was acquitted for Vernita and Arthur. So those are the grandparents. She was acquitted for that, which I think she's definitely guilty, but it kind of makes sense that it wasn't enough to charge her for that. But she was found guilty for Ron's. She got 50 years, but she was released in 2009.
That's not 50 years.
It's not. I really couldn't find a lot of information on why, other than I'm sure it was just like good behavior and
could be good. Richard Kraft's got a long time, and he got out in like 39 years too. So they probably could have a good time law.
So unfortunately she's out, but she was charged with that. And then Glen had been charged with all 3 murders, and he pled guilty, which I found also interesting. But he told the prosecutor it was because the prosecutor was a Scorpio and he knew he didn't stand a chance. Now, I can't tell. He's so weird and crazy that it's possible that that's real, and then it's also he could just be fucking with them.
He's like, I didn't commit these crimes, but because you're a Scorpio, I did commit these crimes, but I would have done them better if I was the one that did them.
Yeah, I don't know. But either way, he was sentenced to an additional 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole.
He already had a few along the way, so he was probably like, you know what, whatever, I don't have the fight in me anymore.
And this was all over the course, these trials were all over the course of like 4 years, so I think it was probably exhausting. But, all in all, like, although Glen will tell everyone that it was all for money, it most definitely wasn't, because he murdered 7 people, 5 of which he was actually charged for, and only netted like $500K in today's dollars.
No, there's definitely something else at play, because when you say I'm homicidally intimate with them, and then when you're really only like retelling these stories like post-coital, like he's definitely enjoying it. Like, it's not just to make money.
I think the money was a bonus, and it was a good way to like loop people in. And you heard like some people, like Barb was all for it and wanted the money. Carmen didn't even want the money. But I think the book also said like he probably could have profited the same if he was just a good dentist. And like, so
excellent point. If he was better at his day job.
Exactly. Not the side hustle though. But he was definitely just like feeding his ego, and I think he loved the control. He loved the idea of pulling it over on the police, like making, they couldn't figure it out. He definitely had no remorse for what he did. And you mentioned, Colby, the idea of he could be a cult leader, and I picture him as exactly that, but he did have a little following in jail. He had all these like spiritually minded prisoners, and he would tell them about the astral projecting. So he was not concerned with being in jail because he could astral project.
He could be wherever he wanted to be, and
like
he could help his followers.
Exactly. So he died without fanfare at age 72 in March 1999 from complications with diabetes. So that was the end of his story. It's just, leading people into the universe apparently. But yeah, so that is the story of Glennon Engleman.
I have one final question.
Yeah.
So we know that he didn't place the bomb in Sophie's car. Was he actually the one that shot Peter, or did
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, he definitely he directly. The only other one that I don't think he actively committed was actually the first murder. I think his alibi was actually legitimate
When he
and
was doing the abortion.
Yep. So he had found someone else to do it, and I think it didn't say anything in the book, but my theory is that James was actually gay and was actually meeting someone, and then that someone was, contracted by Glenn to kill him. That's my theory. And yeah, so he definitely killed Eric. He definitely shot Peter. He was the one who did the murdering in the goose walls, and he didn't place the bomb, but he definitely murdered Sophie.
He made it, I'm sure.
I think he did. Yeah, we didn't get into that either, but I say we like I wrote the book with Susan, but I felt like it. I really
Susan
felt
and
like
I didn't get into that level of detail together.
I read it like twice all the way through, and then because she tells it in a really, really compelling way, very much a story versus a formal case. So it's really good. But yeah, so that was the soap opera that unfortunately 7 people died as a result of it. But it is a crazy story.
I'm just sitting here thinking about, he must have been like very compelling, and he must have been very charming.
Yep.
And people must have been really taken with him, because I mean, for him to find that many women who would just succumb to his discussions, and he was having affairs with them, and they were marrying who he was choosing, and like setting up all this thing, a couple times maybe, but like it happened a lot. Like that's
And I think he played the long con, right? Like he spent 2 of the women, Sandy was young, so that was easy from his perspective. Carmen, he had known all of her life, so he had this long standing relationship where he was the father figure or the knowing person. I mean, even Nick, actually, like that's why he went along with things. He learned a lot. I mean, he called him Doc because it was so, he was so educated and knew so much. So I think he did have this hold on people, which is just crazy. It just is insane that it went on for almost 30 years. And he was only caught because I think that last one was just out of pure rage. Whereas all the other ones were.
Well, we saw in our last case, you get caught when you kill people that you're directly connected to.
Yep, exactly. So I'm glad he was caught. I'm glad he was sentenced and spent the rest of his life in jail. So hope you enjoyed it.
that was wild.
Later,
can you please draw me a diagram?
Yeah,
a family tree, if you will.
So you're joking, but I almost might consider putting that in, doing something like that and putting it on the Instagram, because it is really hard to follow, and it would be really fun to draw. So we'll do that.
I'm not going to the dentist ever again, because I don't want to meet a like-minded dentist.
I kind of want to go under anesthesia while my dentist goes and gets Chick-fil-A for 3 hours.
Nap.
Sweet nap.
It is funny you say that, because when I first saw this case, I picked it because I imagined that it was a guy that like killed people who was a legitimate, he was technically a legitimate dentist, but that he killed them through Novocaine or something like that.
That's what I thought. When you initially told us.
Or like, I thought it would be some weird situation where like the women were seeking him out because they knew he was a contract killer, and they would kind of go in and be like, I got a cavity right here.
Yeah, right. That is exactly what I thought. So it was really unbelievable reading through all this, and definitely for those of you who are really interested in the story, I recommend reading that book, Appointment for Murder by Susan Bakos, because it's told so well, has so much more detail than I even went into, and it's really excellent. So but hey, if you are enjoying us, so hopefully you heard me in the beginning of this, but I'll say it again. If you're enjoying this, make sure you listen and follow and rate and subscribe and do all those things that you do on all the platforms that we're out there on, and follow our Instagram. So we'll post this web on Instagram, and that's at Grim Crime Podcast. And if you want to ask me personally about any of this, you can send an email, grimcrimepodcast@gmail.com, and we hope you continue to listen, learn, and stay alive.